When it comes to raising cattle for the purposes of meat harvesting, we'd all like the breed that physically has the most meat on their bodies. Don't think that because that steer stands at an almighty height, that you'll necessarily get more meat from it. Take the majestic Texas Longhorn for instance, they're absolutely massive. But 40% of that huge body is made up of bone and horn. The lean cut you get from them is stellar, don't get us wrong, but for the sheer size of the animal and the enormous amount of feed it needs to eat in order to give you that Fred Flintstone-sized steak, well, it's not really that much meat at the end of the day considering that you're losing 40% of the animal. So what breed of cattle is going to give you the most meat resting on those bones at the end of the day? We're starting off with a three-way tie for 7th place. The Texas Longhorn, Brahman and the Hereford. Yes, we just criticized the Longhorns for having almost as much bone as they do meat, but there are many other breeds out there that have much worse statistics. 60 to 65% meat from a carcass isn't that bad at all. All three are popular breeds and for good reason. The Brahmans are incredibly well adapted to hot climates. The Herefords are prolific easy birthers, and although they aren't strictly a milking cow, they'll have just enough to supplement a household. And obviously the Longhorns are a prized American breed. The Longhorns get an edge over the Herefords and the Brahmans, just because their use does not stop at their meat. Their hides and horns are highly sought after, and you'd be foolish not to sell that too. Now on to our number 6, the Angus. But this is a tricky one. Anguses come in red and black, but they're so similar that we group the two together. Although the official stats on their meat-to-bone ratio stands at 65%, it can go higher, depending on the lineage, their feed, and what time of the year they are slaughtered. Anguses have more fat than most breeds, that's why. And honestly, why won't you reserve your butchering for the months when you'll get the most marbling out of a cut anyway? If you're timing it right, you can push that ratio up to 70%. We like Anguses for the meat quality, so if that's your intent, go for them. But their mothering, birthing, and milking abilities are all over the board. Some have all of these traits, while others make terrible mothers. So if you're interested in getting a cow to supply the house while birthing for the freezer, look at the stock she comes from. Her own mother and the bull that sired her's parentage should give you a good idea of what she'll be capable of. But one thing that Anguses can be counted on always is that deeply marbled, fatty, and succulent cut. This striking French breed is one of the oldest in the world, and trust us when we say that they've hung around this long for good reason. That 60 to 70% meat-to-bone ratio is just one of the reasons that they're so popular. But there's more to it than just a lot of meat. There are few breeds that are this versatile when it comes to climate and feed. They're good foragers, while still being mild-mannered enough to pen. But the one-ton steers are so majestic and huge that we've forgotten that they make very good small-scale farming cattle. Yes, these massive specimens will do fabulously on the small acreage. That mild temperament and ability to eat anything and everything is why. They're not exactly commercial milkers, but they have enough for their calves. So if you have more than one, they'll have enough to supply the house too. So these big guns are still optional for those of us that don't have a gazillion acres to work with. But if you want a breed that can officially be declared as a dual-purpose milk and meat cattle, then the Simmental is the breed for you. Also falling under the ancient breed status, they carry fantastic forage capabilities, and they're good enough milkers to allow you to sell the product too. All for an impressive 60 to 70% worth of meat and fat on that carcass. And for more than a ton for a fully grown-out bull, you'll still get a reasonably tempered animal that can be both commercially and small-scale farmed. The marketability to them is enormous, given that they're such well-rounded cattle. Will 5-star restaurants be lining up for a cut? Well, no. But they're still well above average in the quality of their meat as well as their milk. The Limousin cattle were originally bred as draft animals back in the day, and when that career went out the window with industrialization, they nearly died out completely. Thankfully, their amazing carcass quality was recognized just in time to save them from certain death. And these babies are massive. Bulls with good genetics can stand well above a ton when they're allowed to grow out fully. 3,500 pounds of body is nothing short of outstanding, especially considering that a good 80% of that body is harvestable. But it's the Limousin's lack of fat that makes this so remarkable. Most of the high clockers have a whole lot of fat, adding to their high meat-to-bone percentages. But the Limousin is remarkably lean, meaning you'll get almost only beef for all of that carcass. Limousines are the perfect small-scale cattle. They forage extremely well in a wide range of conditions, they're hardy, and they come with a little extra milk. Enough for a side hustle at the very least anyway. And again, like with all of the ancient breeds, they've had a few hundred years to develop a natural affinity for humans. Chilled out and perfectly content with your company, the only drawback is that they need friends. You can't just have one limousine. You must have an equal number of them at all times, or one will be left out and then they just droop from loneliness. 2, 4, 6, 8 or 5 dozen. It doesn't matter how many you keep as long as each one has a buddy. This is true for most cattle though, so you shouldn't be surprised. They are herding animals after all, and they just need friends. The Piedmontese is a remarkable specimen. 85% product sounds too good to be true, but it's because of their unusual genetics that causes what's called double muscling. The clinical term is muscular hypertrophy, and it's usually achieved by athletes who build an unusually large amount of muscle through exercise, but the Piedmontese has a gene that does this naturally. Seriously, these steers look like the quintessential gym bro that never misses leg day, but as bulky as they are, they're surprisingly compact in size, slaughtering out at an average of 1,400 pounds. They do still fall under the classification as large, but they're not nearly as gigantic as the others. The lean beef will yield only 17% worth of bone and fat combined. That's a stellar amount of meat to get for a very economical breed to feed and maintain. They forage well, they breed with very few complications, and they're decent milkers to boot. If anything, their massive carcass yield makes a lot of us forget just how good their dairy production is. Piedmontese cattle aren't exactly the most common cattle in the world, though not endangered by any means. Those muscly flanks have given them a bit of a pageantry status and they're highly prized on the show circuit. So, a good genetic line is going to cost you a pretty penny. It's a shame really, they are the ultimate all-around cattle. They can work, they can milk, they can slaughter for more than most, and they're cheap and easy to rear. Personally, they're our favorite of all of the breeds on our list. But alas, there's one that beats out all of the others when it comes to how much meat they can carry on the least amount of skeletal structure. And that's the iconic Wagyu cattle. The statistics for this breed is nothing short of unbelievable. Approximately 47.8% muscle, 41.7% fat, and only 10.6% bone. We all know of the high-quality marbled meat that sells for more than any other beef in the world. But don't make the mistake of thinking that Wagyu is too exclusive for us regular folk to get our hands on. Of the 4 primary variations of the breed, the Black Wagyu, or Akagi, is actually pretty common all around the world. Sure, the pure lines and genetic show winners will cost more, but there are plenty of the black to be found just about anywhere. The brown, short-horned, and polled varieties are found exclusively in Japan, and they require a specialized diet and way of rearing. But the black is a surprisingly easy livestock to raise. It all depends on what you want from them. If left to their own devices, Wagyu will forage very well for their own feed and they'll still have a much higher quality marbled meat than any other breed. If you want that 5-star restaurant level of marbling, only then will you need to bring in specialized diets and fluids and all the other finicky things needed to get it to that level. But really, even if you go back to the very basics, water and grassland, the meat is still more in weight, and the distribution of fat is outstanding. You don't have to overthink or overpay Wagyu as much as you'd think you'd need to, is what we're trying to say. Wagyu, unfortunately, is not a dual-purpose breed. They'll give you quality meat and that's where it ends. Milk-wise, they have enough for their calves and maybe even a little for you, but they've been bred to put fat on their frames, not in their dairy. So it's just not high enough in butterfat to be a good milk to make yogurt, cheese, or even soap from. Here it's all about the meat, but that's what you came for after all, isn't it? But if you want a breed that can do more than just produce meat and act as a dual-purpose breed, then our money is on the Piedmontese. Either way, you can't go wrong with any of the breeds on our list in our opinion. Or do you have a specialty breed that we aren't aware of yet? You know the drill. Give us some nuggets of wisdom in the comments down below. Our viewers' engagement is what keeps the lights on over here, and there is nothing we appreciate more than the deep knowledge base from those who have their wellies on the ground where it matters. See you next week, cheers!